there seems to be a sense from the official opposition that this is a moment to define or determine how Parliament will function in the coming weeks, and they are negotiating around the structures. We've said we're of course happy to have these conversations. We've put forward some proposals around things that we think could work to both minimize the risk to Canadians while moving towards a virtual Parliament and ensuring the debate and accountability that is so important in our democracy. And we just hope that the official opposition will choose to realize that we need to pass this legislation quickly to get the help out to Canadians as quickly as possible.
Time is running out for thousands of Canadian businesses that are at risk of permanently closing without financial help. The feds have offered a 75% wage subsidy for businesses affected by the pandemic. Depends, of course, on your revenue and how it compares to last year, but the offer is out there at this point. Just last hour, MPs were recalled to Parliament for Saturday to look at the legislation. All federal parties say they want the aid to get out the door, but there has been political wrangling all week over what's in the bill or what's not in it. The Conservatives have also been calling for more oversight of the government during this time, proposing bringing back question period in some form or another for at least part of the week. I spoke to Andrew Scheer, leader of the Federal Conservative Party, about all of that just before the announcement was made about the House being recalled. I asked him if the Liberals would have to buy into that question period proposal to get Conservative support for the legislation they're putting forward Saturday. Here's what he had to say.
We're having conversations around several pieces. First, of course, is the legislation that we have now received and are going through, doing our due diligence. We're proposing solutions, aspects of the bill that we believe would deliver a better result for Canadians. As I understand, all parties are doing the exact same type of work. In addition to that, we believe that on an ongoing basis, there needs to be regular parliamentary oversight. We need to be able to question ministers on behalf of our constituents. We need to challenge decisions that they've made, making sure that it's right. They need to be able to stand up to that kind of scrutiny. If they are, in fact, the best decisions that they're making, they should be able to explain them. We also need to call attention to gaps that exist. For example, even in the wage subsidy, initially it was designed at 10%. Conservatives and other voices around the country called for an increased subsidy. They came back with 75%. There are concerns we have around people who are receiving the emergency benefit, hitting a ceiling on the number of hours of work that they can do. Right now, the government has indicated they're going to set that at 10 hours. We believe they should be more flexible on that because there are many businesses that are looking for workers. So we believe that having these regular sessions in the House of Commons with a reduced number of MPs so that we can fulfill public safety directives is essential to get the best possible results for Canadians.
So again, though, I just want to make sure that I'm explicit. Are you saying that that needs to happen in order for your party to support the wage subsidy measures that will be put forward officially in Parliament?
We're not approaching this with ultimatums or with a list of demands that we're going to in any way prevent the ability for people to receive help as quickly as possible. We're having different conversations through different channels at the same time. As I said, we've got a lot of things that we're focused on right now. The government has to move very quickly. We have said that we support these measures. We support the wage subsidy in principle. We support elevating it from 10% to 75%. So when the Prime Minister recalls the House, he could have recalled it earlier. He could have designed the legislation to fit the program on the front end. We're only having this conversation because of those errors in the first draft of the bill. And again, even the Prime Minister himself said that we're weeks away before these program applications are up and running. So the opposition, the official opposition, the Conservative Party is playing a constructive role. That's how I would characterize these conversations. I believe they're very constructive. We're having great dialogue back and forth, not only between the government and ourselves, but with the other opposition parties. I hope that continues because at the end of the day, we all want what's best for our country.
Is the sitting of question period necessary for the accountability that you talk about? And I ask because in the last instance, with the original legislation, much of it did change thanks to opposition parties of all kinds scrutinizing it, going back to the government saying, here's what you got wrong, here's what we'd like you to change. And ultimately it was changed. That accountability did exist. Why can't the same thing happen now without the regular sittings of question period. And again, I take the proposal, I guess, I just would show you, for example, that only in Alberta are they having regular sittings. Every other province has shut that down at this point.
Well, keep in mind, we're not suggesting we have regular sittings in terms of 338 MPs and several hours a day.
No, but sitting 4 days a week, right?
Well, we've proposed that as obviously something that we would like to see. If the government has a different view, or if other parties have a different suggestion, we're open to that. It's essential for us that these types of things happen in public, that the public can see what's going on, why decisions are being made.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mr. Scheer.
Thank you very much.
That's Federal Conservative Party leader Andrew Scheer. We're discussing the House resuming on Saturday. The government will introduce legislation to sort of make good, I guess you could say, on its proposal to offer a 75% wage subsidy aimed at helping many of the businesses, of course, that have been so negatively impacted by the spread of COVID-19. That was the perspective of the Conservative Party. Let's go to Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, to get his perspective. Hi, Mr. Singh. Good to see you.
Hi, good to see you as well.
So let's start off with the news that Parliament will be back on Saturday. Is there a deal on the legislation? Do you know if all the parties have come to agreement? I know that the government gave it on Monday to opposition parties. Where do things stand?
Well, with respect to the 75% wage subsidy, it's something that I called for specifically in the House. I asked questions on this. I said, we need to follow what other countries have done and have a wage subsidy of at least 75% to make sure people can keep their jobs. And so that's something I support and something I'm in favor of. I also made it very clear in a conversation with the Prime Minister today on the phone, as well as in a letter I sent to the Prime Minister, that if we're going back to Ottawa, my first offer is that we need to send money directly to all Canadians. There's too many people falling through the cracks. There are too many situations where people have a little bit of income greatly and significantly reduced because of COVID-19 that aren't going to qualify for the CERB. And that seems to be incredibly unfair. So my first offer, my first proposition is let's send money directly to all Canadians. And then as a compromise position, I said, we can't go to Ottawa and not fix some of the glaring holes in the CERB. Some of those holes that the Prime Minister himself has admitted exist. So I said, let's go back to Ottawa, quickly pass the wage subsidy so that businesses can keep people hired. And secondly, let's make sure we use the time there to ensure that the CERB is fixed, that the gaps that are leaving so many people behind, nearly a third of the people who need the benefit don't qualify because of a minor technicality like limited or small amounts of income that they're earning that simply are not enough to let them live or to earn enough to pay the bills. But because of that small amount that they are getting, they are precluded from the CERB. So those massive gaps have to be closed, and that's what I made clear to the Prime Minister.
So when you say those massive gaps have to be closed, do you mean that you propose to the Prime Minister that there be additional legislation introduced on top of the wage subsidy or mixed in with it? How would that work from your perspective?
Well, I made it clear that we're going back to Ottawa, and if there's any legislation that needs to be changed, let's get that done while we're in Ottawa to ensure that Canadians get the help they need. If there's literally millions of Canadians that are falling through the cracks with this current proposal, and if we're going back to Ottawa anyways, it makes no sense to go to Ottawa and pass a wage subsidy while leaving these massive gaps in the CERB. So I wanted it to be very clear that for me, this is something we need to fix. We can't go to Ottawa and not fix the gaps in the CERB to make sure that people are getting the help they need, that those who don't qualify, like students, and those who've worked multiple jobs and have lost 2 out of 3 jobs, those who've seen a massive reduction in their hours and they can't earn enough to be able to put food on the table, but don't qualify because they're still getting some small amount of income, those gaps need to be closed. And I made that clear in our conversation as well as through a letter.
And what was the response from the Prime Minister? Did he agree to that?
There seemed to be openness to doing it, and we'll have some follow-up negotiations and conversations to ensure that those gaps are being filled and that those that are being left behind are actually going to get the access to help. So I'm confident that there's efforts being made, and I'm hopeful that they will result in a better system that covers more Canadians.
Is the addressing of those gaps a necessary condition of your support on the wage subsidy legislation?
Well, I didn't propose it as an ultimatum. I proposed it as, if we're going to Ottawa, it makes no sense at all to leave Ottawa without having also fixed this problem. So I'm offering my help and my support to make sure that those gaps are closed, that while we're in Ottawa, we should not leave until the CERB covers all the Canadians that need help, and particularly those who are being left behind because of minor technicalities.
You've talked also this week about sort of sending money directly to everyone rather than sort of just certain groups. And is that different than what you're talking about with addressing the gaps? And I'm asking the question because I've seen some of the evidence in other countries, for example, like in the United States, where they have sent a check, the idea is to send a check out. And some of them are waiting weeks and weeks for it. Seems like the technical system is working for the CERB. The money is getting out. It's just missing some people. So if they found a way to cover those other people, are you still okay with the CERB system?
Well, I still believe the best way to get people help they need is to send it to everybody. The application process requires people to go through and apply. It requires a set of criteria. And we know that the vast majority of Canadians are impacted by COVID-19. And to ensure that no one falls through the cracks, that no one is missed, let's provide that support to everybody and then tax back those who didn't need the help and recover that in the next tax session. For me, what's so important right now is the urgency and getting it to everybody and ensuring no one is left behind. As this crisis continues, more and more people are going to need help. And I can imagine a scenario where the application process gets overwhelmed or the number of people falling through the cracks is overwhelming. Either way, we need to send help to people. They need direct financial support. And I'm still encouraging that as a primary and first step. Let's get help to everybody right away. As a second step, though, I acknowledge that the CERB seems to be responding to those who've applied, but there's just too many people that aren't qualifying that should get the help. And that's why I've asked the government to fix those gaps as a compromise position.
Just quickly before I let you go, Mr. Singh, will you be here Saturday?
I will be.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's leader of the NDP, Jagmeet Singh. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. An unprecedented drop in Canada's employment that is both unsurprising given the scale of the pandemic and the crisis, but still jaw-dropping.
These numbers are a punch in the gut. The unthinkable is happening. Ontario lost at least 400,000 jobs last month due to the fallout of this terrible virus. Sadly, these numbers are just the tip of the iceberg. They're just a snapshot of what we're dealing with. But these aren't just numbers. These are real people. People who are struggling out there. And it breaks my heart.
That's Ontario Premier Doug Ford echoing what we heard from political leaders in every province today. Over 1 million Canadians lost their job in March, just as COVID-19 was beginning to sweep this country. Almost half of those job losses, as you heard the Premier mention, were in Ontario. Another 2 million Canadians saw their hours reduced by at least half. And take a look at your screen right now, because that's by far the worst month for job losses. This, by far, I should say, is the worst month for job losses on record. And it's likely to get worse than this because the data is only based on the week of March 15th, when, as you'll remember, the crisis was really just getting underway here. So what does that all mean for the road ahead? Frances Donald is the global chief economist with Manulife Financial. She joins us from Montreal. And Trevor Tombe is an associate professor of economics at the University of Calgary. I believe he's in Calgary. Good to see you both. Thanks for making time for us.
Thanks for having us.
Ms. Donald, I want to start with you because you, I believe, were the one that tweeted that chart, and it circulated our newsroom today that shows just the absolute drop-off after you look at years of various fluctuations in employment in this country. Can you contextualize for us and for our viewers just how historic what we're witnessing is?
That's right. This isn't just the worst jobs number we've seen in our modern economic history. It's 8 times worse than even the worst months that we had in 2009. But it does illustrate an important component of this recession, which looks so much different than what we've seen historically. And that is that we're probably experiencing what might take a year for a typical economy to lose in terms of jobs in a very compressed period of time. So not only is this data point the worst we've seen on record, but I suspect almost every data point we're going to get over the next several months, whether it's related to how much we spend or what housing markets are doing, is going to look, unfortunately, very similar.
Yeah, and Professor Toom, I wanted to ask you as well about this because I looked and noticed immediately that the data, and StatsCan was very careful to point it out, was from the week of March 15th to the 21st. And I think back to that, and it was just a couple days before then. It seems like a lifetime now. But a couple days before then, the government was saying you can no longer travel, for example. It's not a good idea to travel. That was just the beginning. What does that mean for these data points going forward, do you think?
So it was just the beginning, and we should remember that the labor force survey is a survey, as the name implies. So StatsCan is literally contacting Canadians and going through a questionnaire with them. And that week of March 15th was when the health crisis was really just starting. And so we won't know the full scale and depth of the implications of COVID-19 and the public health measures on the labor market until the beginning of May, when we get the data for April. So that's important to keep in mind. But even despite that, the scale of the drop that we saw, not just unprecedented in terms of recent history, but larger than ever in recorded economic history, as far back as the Great Depression. The drop that we saw in March of about 5.3% is roughly twice as large as the worst employment drop, monthly drop in the Great Depression. So it's definitely unprecedented. That word is appropriate here.
Ms. Donald, we've seen since then a number of statistics come from the government, or at least numbers that they're putting out daily now, about how many people are accessing, for example, the CERB or accessing it through an EI application. It looks like in total they're nearing about 5 million. Is that a better picture right now, I guess, or an accurate portrayal of even how many more people have lost their jobs?
Well, it certainly gives us a better feel than data that looks back over a month. But the silver lining when I see that is that unlike in these prior recessions, we have government support that has stepped in very aggressively. One of the challenges with this number is that as much as we think over the next 6 months, we hope that many of these individuals will be rehired. There is a questioning amongst economists is whether or not those wage subsidies that were retroactively applied will mean that some of these 1 million are actually rehired back in short order. That's a hope, but all we have to go on right now is those CERB applications, and they suggest to us that this really is the tip of the iceberg, that there are millions of Canadians who are suffering and looking for support from the government.
Professor Toom, on the two sort of packages that the government put forth, the CERB, which is aimed at helping individuals who lost all their income. It doesn't cover at this point, though the Prime Minister says eventually something will, people who have lost some of their income or most of their income, but not all. And then the wage subsidy program. Do you think those are going to be effective?
So I think these are not the end of what governments across the country, provincial and federal, are going to be rolling out. I think they've done a phenomenal job rolling out support as quickly as they can, but we shouldn't view this as the end. And we see from one day to the next, the federal government and provincial governments are changing and adapting their programs. I think these are very important at a situation like this because the contraction in employment and the reduction in economic activity is a choice we're making to combat the spread of the virus, to prevent much more catastrophic and significant health and economic implications down the line. So these programs to bridge people through the crisis are very important to provide income to families, credit to businesses, to try and, to the extent possible, maintain worker and firm connections. And we saw some indication of that in this data. So we look at the number of people flowing into unemployment in March, and the overwhelming majority of individuals flowing into unemployment are in the form of temporary layoffs. So the number of permanent layoffs is not actually that much different than what we saw in March of last year. So that's some early, I guess, hopeful indications that we will be able to recover once we get through the crisis.
And just to give our viewers a quick indication, you'll see on the corner of your screen there, the President of the United States is giving an update on the spread of coronavirus in Washington and in the country at large. We will head there in a few minutes to see what he has to say, because there is some word that there could be movement on the oil price front where Russia and Saudi Arabia are concerned. But I just want to get a few more minutes with Ms. Donald and Professor Toom. And Ms. Donald, when it comes to what might come next from the government, what would your prescription be?
Well, one of my concerns is that while we're all hopeful that everyone will be back to work in a matter of weeks or months, there is some concern that rehiring activity will be a lot slower than layoffs. And many of these programs are designed to, as Professor Toom noted, bridge the gap. But my concern is the gap may actually end up being a lot longer than some of these better case scenarios. So I'm thinking about, even as we relax some of that social distancing at some point in the future and we see a good chunk of labor rehired, there is going to be a segment of this population that is left behind on the other side, and they're going to need support as well. So now it's not just about mitigating in the next couple of months. It's about thinking about who's going to need help 6 months from now, and will we have the policies to support them as well?
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much to both of you for your time this evening and your insights. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
It's Frances Donald, Global Chief Economist with Manulife Financial, and Trevor Toom, an Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Calgary. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.